it's possible for Australians to be paying 85% tax rate.
Wow.
But they wouldn't know it because it's so carefully concealed.
I'm Rob Forsyth. Welcome to Liberalism in Question, a series of podcasts from us here at the Centre for Independent Studies, when we examine the pluses and minuses of classical liberalism, its strengths, its weaknesses, and its prospect for the future. In this series, I've had some people who have been mildly critical, mildly enthusiastic, but today I have a man who's very enthusiastic about liberalism, especially in its classical form. He's Ron Manners AO, both a man with mining background. He's still the chairman of the Main West Group, which is a great mining conglomeration in Western Australia, and the founder and director of Mannkal Economic Education Foundation, whose job is actually to train and teach people some of the principles of classical liberalism. At 88, he's still going flat out with your enthusiasm. Ron, welcome.
Pleasure to be here, Rob.
Why are you so enthusiastic? It's almost been a lifelong enthusiasm for libertarian or classical liberal ideas.
Well, I think rational selfishness is what drives me, Rob, in that I think to survive I've had to learn when to shrug them off. And when they keep climbing on your back, I had a dreadful situation with the taxation department back in the mid-70s when they misinterpreted the Tax Act completely and they were trying to put me out of business. So I learned to defend myself. And I think there's always been driven. And Ayn Rand said once, her classic comment that she said once, they will only do to you what you let them do to you. So I think but surely your commitment is more than just one about Ron Manners' life. You know, you want to be free from being constrained, so you do your business. Yeah. But surely you've got a bigger picture than just yourself. Well, I think they rob your time if you fill in all the forms that are put in front of you these days. So I wouldn't have any time left to do anything useful.
Now my point is your commitment to liberalism is not just personal for yourself. Yeah. You want liberalism for the society.
Well, I do, but I think it's important to say that being a libertarian has been good for me.
Right.
And perhaps they should try it themselves because it just may be good for them too. I can't design anyone else's life for them. All I can do is bring an idea to the threshold of someone's consciousness and leave it with them.
And what is this idea?
Of the individual responsibility, and that we will surely make better decisions for ourselves than we leave those decisions to be made by others.
Right. So as far as possible, take responsibility for oneself, take decisions for oneself.
Absolutely.
And the more that happens, the happier society is?
Absolutely. You'll find many of those things that government insist on doing for us, we've already done for ourselves, and we can dispense with so much.
Now, have you always thought this, or was this something you came to? Did you discover this, or have you always thought this?
I think my grandfather died 13 years before I was born. His name was W.G. Manners, and I got to know him only by writing a book about him and putting a lot of his writings together. And I can't believe that these things are transmitted through the blood.
So he had a similar views.
Yeah, and I'd never met him.
There you are.
But it's amazing when you put all that stuff together. And he was.
So you've held these views, therefore, since quite a young man.
Oh yeah, I got introduced to the Leonard Reed of the Foundation for Economic Education when I was 16, completely by accident. And I started corresponding with him, and he became my mentor from the age of 16. And then I met another fellow called John Hospers, who was a great philosopher, and I was impressed at his writings on philosophy. I had no idea that 12 years later. And then I signed up for a philosophy course where his book was the textbook, but I didn't know that he would be the first libertarian presidential candidate in America 12 years later after I started studying his book. So these these things come to me at a very, very early age.
Okay, now some might say, but look, you are a privileged man, right? You inherited a company from your father in mining.
Well, there was two and sixpence in the bank account.
Right. So it wasn't that privilege at all then? No. Because some might say,
nobody had any money when I was young.
So this isn't a case of you've got a philosophy that suits the rich.
Not at all, no. No, I think prosperity should be shared, and the best way to do it is to go get it.
Go get it.
Yep.
For yourself, and let others go get
it. And all those people that you're responsible for come with you. Right. You bring everyone. You set the example, and others will follow.
Since you became a convert as a young lad, a lot has happened in the world, good and bad. We've seen the good, the end of communism, the end of apartheid in South Africa, a number of things, and in the USSR, I should say. It's still around in various sociological departments. But we've also seen a strange phenomenon that liberal ideas seem to grow, especially after the crisis of the 70s. But am I right on that today, instead of waxing, they're waning? Liberal ideas are in decline, both in Australia and around the world.
Yeah, we're losing the battle. I remember going to Russia in 1990 with the Cato Institute. We were training the Russians on how to handle free enterprise, and at that time, that's when the Soviet Union collapsed completely. And so they lost the economic battle, completely lost it. The Soviets lost the economic battle. We won, but we kept fighting the economic battle. But they regrouped, and I somehow, don't ask me how, but I was a delegate at the Socialist International Conference that was held at the Intercontinental Hotel just up the road here in late 1992. And that's when the Soviets, ex-Soviet, all regrouped. The president was Willy Brandt from West Germany. He was running the conference, and he had the Gough Whitlam was there, Bob Hawke was there, Gareth Evans was there. They were all Fabians in that sense, and they were all plotting how to go forward now that the Soviet Union had collapsed. They talked about capturing the culture, capturing the educational system. They were fully directed toward the long march through the institutions. They recognised that there was a cultural war, and we were still fighting the economic war. And it took me years to really realise that they were so successful at selling that message to people. We were fighting the previous war on economics.
So the liberalism as an economic, I want to come back to this in a moment, as an economic policy is one thing, but the notion of liberalism as a social policy is another, and that's where you think those who were supporting liberalism dropped the ball.
Yeah, we kept fighting the old battles. That we didn't realise that the enemy, if I can call the Marxists collectively, were far smarter than we were.
I'm not sure you'd call Rob Hawke a Marxist, but I know what you mean. The Social Democrats.
Well, and they changed. They resolved at that meeting to change their name to Social Democracy. Right. That was they changed it from the Socialist International, which was the organisation they.
But surely, Ron, it's because people were open to the notion of social democracy because of what had happened. I'm thinking, there was great hope and reform in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, which led to Australia being prosperous. But then we had problems of the global financial crisis. We had the problem of globalisation, which has led to great growth of wealth, but it meant there were parts of the society hollowed out. In other words, wasn't there a downside in liberal economics as well? And didn't that make the place ready for the decline of focus on it?
We have a real problem, Rob, in Australia, and I call it financial illiteracy in a sense, because if you ask the people on the street, for instance, why do we no longer have a car industry?
Good example.
The answer you will get from so many even well-educated people is that it's because the government stopped supporting the car industry. So it collapsed. The real answer was only picked up by Robert Gottliebsen, I think is the only economic journalist who's picked up the fact that the car industry, when General Motors and Ford tried to modernise their factories, the unions prevented them from bringing any new equipment in because they saw that as a threat to the numbers. They thought that would reduce the numbers of people by modernising the factories. And Ford and General Motors both made the decision, if we can't manage our facilities in Australia, we're out of there. So they left. So it was nothing to do with government tariffs or support for the industry. It was that you were no longer able to manage your facility, so you got out of there. So that's if we can look at, and that's, again, if you look at all those people that you were saying, the people that weren't enjoying prosperity when we moved forward into those wonderful, we call them the Hawke-Keating economic reforms that came out of there, were really designed by John Hyde and his group of drives in the Liberal Party, who designed all those wonderful economic policies, but they couldn't convince their own Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, to do anything about it. But those policies were picked up in entirety by Bob Hawke.
Yes, that's true.
When he became Prime Minister, much to his surprise, and he brought all those things. The people that didn't prosper were not victims of those things. They were prevented by maybe union controls, maybe cartels and all sorts of corporate capitalism and stuff that prevented those reforms from flowing freely through to everyone in the community as they should have.
It's important to state here that being pro-market, which you are, and emphasising maximising liberty is not the same as being pro-big business.
Oh, I could never put it as well as that. You put it, the confusion between capitalism and crony capitalism, it's a misnomer to use the word capitalism.
Crony capitalism is when a company or some uses the government basically to game the system,
Absolutely,
to keep control.
Yeah.
And
they let the side down badly.
Which would imply to me that to have a genuinely liberal society, you need a strong government, but a strong government with integrity. Set the rule, because in a short and free for all, the big will dominate the small, use their power. Right?
If you can think of the government being strong, I think I'd like it to be strong in the terms that we like the umpire of a game to be strong, unbending. That's the rules, that's the way it is. Don't come to me on the side with all sorts of promises of capturing another block of votes to get me in next time.
So one of the troubles has been a failure of government to be fit, to be strong enough in the right places, you think?
They do anything for a few votes.
One of the issues has been, since COVID, there's been a panic about globalisation. People worried that we couldn't get masks in Australia. And so there's been a kind of turn away from the fact that we're all wealthier when we trade freely, use our comparative advantage, to increasingly putting up nationalist barriers. We're seeing this in America, where both sides, at the time of recording, we don't have we're just beginning to have the campaign, but both sides are basically nativist in their economics. Both sides are about protecting themselves, putting up barriers, and this is happening all over the place, including in Australia. This is bad news, isn't it?
This is tragic to Australia, that we've really priced ourselves out of world markets. And I know the federal government, with all their IR rules that they've brought in now, in an effort to stamp out what they call the gig economy, is doing untold harm. There are many people that would prefer to be in the gig economy.
For example, yes.
And if we could only have somebody, instead of bringing in more controls, freeing up and having a free choice, so you can choose. A lot of people, for instance, the young people that we're in touch with have lots of jobs, and every job they go to now, they've got to sign up for the superannuation and all sorts of what they call entitlements. They end up with a multitude of superannuation policies which are also minimalist, that they'll never be able to join them all together. They would prefer to be paid as what they call them, permanent part-time people, and paid the premium per hour and make their own arrangements.
So this is an example, Ron, of let's assume it's well-intentioned. I'm not a well-intentioned policy to help people.
It's always put to us that it's going to help people,
but often trying to help people doesn't always help people.
Yeah. For instance, Uber started off really as a gig economy. Now it's got to comply with all the rules. Often an Uber fare costs you more than a regular taxi. That's fine. You still go for it because the cars are cleaner, they're privately owned, and there's a sense of ownership in the thing. But no longer is it able to compete.
So one of the problems, you believe, is that the government's seeking to do good, implying more regulation, which has the effect of not doing good.
Yeah, and it's the things that are unseen that are often the people that we don't see, the companies that didn't get started. We don't see the organisations that didn't get started, because you've now got to go to a whole.
That's a very good point.
We
don't see the opportunity cost, as it were, of the policies that we. Can I press you on this, because Australians, on the whole, I think, if there's any kind of problem, the natural thing is to say, we want it fixed, and fixed means by the government. Whereas in a liberal or libertarian view of the world, we have a problem. It may be the government occasionally, but often we need to let people making their free decisions will solve it. That's your policy. That's far less saleable, is it?
Yeah.
Do it yourself is nowhere nearly as convincing as the government will do it for you.
And thank goodness there's all sorts of indexes that are published. The Fraser Institute published the wonderful index of where is the best countries in the world in which to go exploring for minerals. That's
something close to your heart.
That's a wonderful. That tells you which countries to go to, which countries to avoid. But there's other indexes on the ease of starting a business, and that's where tiny little Estonia. I got e-residency for Estonia, and you want to start a business in Estonia, you can do it 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. It takes you 10 minutes to do it online. You've got a company.
And is this leading to, is having good effects in Estonia?
Absolutely. There's about 100,000 e-residents of Estonia operating all around the world from an Estonian country base, where they pay flat rate tax, 20%, going up to 22% shortly though, flat rate, and that's the end of it. No GSTs, no hidden costs, no stamp duties, none of those things that you don't know. The things we're up against here, for instance, nobody that I know can tell me how much tax they pay. I don't know any Australian that can tell me how much tax they pay. When you ask them, they relate it to the personal rate of income tax. But I know that I bought when I moved out of a company for a while back. I bought a car. I bought a Lexus for $130,000, thinking that would probably last me for the rest of my life. And then I was in Hong Kong and I saw the same car for sale for just over $80,000.
You don't want that experience. That's
$50,000 difference. And I said, wow, that's a big difference. What makes up that $50,000? I came back. It took me about 2 weeks just to gather the information. $7,500 stamp duty. $15,000, I think, was luxury car tax.
Yes.
Added. So there's that extra. It's just about $40,000. That's added to the income, my tax for that year, and you've got to look at you buy a house, you pay stamp duty, you do this, add all those things together. It's possible for Australians to be paying 85% tax rate.
Wow!
But they wouldn't know it because it's so carefully concealed.
If it was more transparent, people may prefer different policies.
I'm sure they would.
Although, it puts back to taxation. I know that government wastes. I know that government does waste. I'm not pretending that's not true. But taxation is to provide services that say people in Australia want.
Sure,
like Medicare,
I'm a
NDIS.
Great believer in government if it sticks only to the legitimate role of government.
Well, what's the legitimate role of government in the Ron Manners world?
Well, you've got to, absolutely, they've got to run the system of land titles.
Yes.
To act as an independent arbitrator, internal defence, police forces, external defence, the army, and that's about it. But that's about it.
You wouldn't not Medicare?
There's really only 5%, perhaps 5% of our population that need assistance. And I'll tell you what, they were looked after very well by voluntary organisations before the government came along. Just as people, we used to educate ourselves before the government got involved in education. And ever since the government got involved in education...
But the government got involved in education in the 1880s.
Yeah. Way back before that, the schools were private. And the best universities in the world now are universities that take no government money.
I understand, but surely it can't. It's can't possibly be the case that Australians could afford, out of their own money, to pay what it would cost to educate their children.
No,
I know at the top end you can, but not your ordinary Australians. They need taxation to help give them education. Surely.
It doesn't have to be compulsory.
Education?
Yeah, no, the compulsory tax doesn't have to be levied for.
But surely that means if you can afford to pay a private education, you don't get taxed. You're saying for the education, but that surely is simply favouring the rich. They pay less tax because they're the concept of it. Surely we need. I'm just thinking of medicine, education, to be other areas where the government has a legitimate right to be involved in. Flattening somewhat the massive inequalities that can exist.
But Rob, I say I think there is a role, but I'm saying there's a very small percentage of people that need that help, and I don't think any of us will mind if our taxpayers' dollars are spent on helping that small thing. But we talked about economic reforms. I talked about John Hyde bringing in those reforms that were used by Bob Hawke when he became the Prime Minister. John Hyde's got one arm. And I'll mention this, and I had a car accident, I got a mangled right arm. I just put this forward. When I had my accident and when John Hyde lost his arm, there was no NDIS. So we both went ahead and became very useful, productive individuals for the rest of our lives. But anyone that has an accident gets immediately recruited and brought into the NDIS fold now and say, we will look after you forever, and here is your list of entitlements. You never have to stir. You can stay in bed all day if you like. And they recruit people to come into this welfare fold, this is why it's got completely out of control.
Of course.
So
well, I'm not sure it's quite what they do, but out of control is a problem, and it's going to.
Well, I remember I had 4 children way back, and they had something called child endowment. Or they probably got another word for it now, but our kids were out of that age group, and I was still running. I was in Kalgoorlie, still running. I was the president of the Chamber of Commerce there at the time, and I was very conscious that the child endowment money was still arriving, and my wife had gone and cancelled it several times, and I went down myself to the office saying, listen, I want this cancelled immediately because I couldn't afford to be exposed by receiving this when we were not entitled to it. And the guy said, look, would you mind leaving it in place for a while? Because if we have 3 less people, we will go from a D to an E thing, and we will lose some of our staff will have to be moved to other centres because we haven't got enough people on welfare to keep our classification going.
Okay, good.
And I thought to myself, is that how the system works?
Well. Ron, one last question with you. Are you basically hopeful about the future, notwithstanding your belief that in the recent times the shine has gone off in the public concern for libertarianism or classical liberalism? Are you hopeful for the future, or are you pessimistic?
We're celebrating our 30th anniversary of our Mannkal Foundation, and this is a question that I'm repeatedly asked: Ron, would you do it again? So looking back on the 30-year period of creating, we've got nearly 2,500 young students we've sent through these economic opportunities and internships, and I look back at those 30 years and I say, wow, we had a few duds. We had a few dud scholars, but we had a few very, very shining examples, and the shining examples by far outweigh the few duds that we've had. So that's what makes me optimistic. That if you have a go and if you keep scoring over 51%, you keep going.
Well, you're an example of that for sure. Ron Manners, thank you very much. Thank you very much. My guest has been Ron Manners AO, a character, an enthusiast for liberalism, and I think a man who achieved a great deal in that. This has been another in the Liberalism in Question series. I'm Rob Forsyth from the Centre for Independent Studies. Thank you for watching.